All right, we're going to get started. Thank you, everybody, for joining us this morning.
Good morning, everybody, and thank you for joining the Youth Engagement Community of Practice in our first webinar today. I am Katie Campos, the co-champion for the YouthPower Youth Engagement Community of Practice. And we are here today to connect two emerging trends in development. First, the importance of meaningfully engaging youth in the design, implementation, and measurement of projects. And second, the increased presence of makerspaces across the world as a way for non-specialists to gain skills and have access to tools. So here to connect those dots are Rob Ryan Silva, the director of the DAI Maker Lab. Some of you might have taken his soldering sessions during the Youth Economic Opportunity Summit at the Making Sense conference a few weeks ago. Rob is really a pioneer in bringing the maker movement into the development field, and especially in youth and workforce development-focused projects. Most recently, Rob has worked in Jordan, Cambodia, and Honduras, introducing the maker movement concepts at the community level. And we also have Eric Kilbride, the managing partner at Block by Block Consulting, who is an expert in creating buzz and energy with youth around project interventions. Eric and Block by Block are most known for their community asset mapping and have identified the maker movement as a growing tool for youth engagement. Eric and Rob's combination of skill sets will provide insights into the maker movement and how it is a natural fit for meaningfully engaging youth by design. We will take questions through our question box following the 30-minute presentation, so please submit your questions at any time and I will field them after our presentation. Rob, now over to you to tell us what exactly the maker movement is.
Sure. And so as Katie says, my name's Rob Ryan Silva, and I work for DAI. I run an initiative we call the DAI Maker Lab. As she says, the DAI Maker Lab is intended to bring some of the tools and approaches that are emerging from what's called the maker movement into DAI's global development work. And I could spend the whole hour trying to explain what the maker movement is, and it probably wouldn't be a very satisfying explanation, and you'd still have lots of questions after that. So let me instead describe some of these tools and approaches that we're talking about, and describe kind of how we can apply these in a youth development context. This is not my slide, so I'm gonna zoom past that. Here we go. All right, so the first tool set that I'd like to talk about is modular electronics. So if you wanted to work in modern electronic design just a few years ago, the barriers were pretty high to doing that. So if you open up any of the kind of household electronics that you might have, your microwave oven, a DVD player, you'll find at the core of that a little chip called a microcontroller. And a microcontroller is it's kind of like a small computer, kind of it's not a general purpose computer like you have in your laptop that will run any piece of software you like. It's generally designed to do one, usually a relatively simple task inside a device. And microcontrollers have been at the core of our consumer electronics since the 70s. But if you wanted, as a non-specialist, if any of the folks listening in on this call wanted to work with those, until about 10 years ago, the barrier was high. You needed special hardware in order to program them. The software tool chain that you used to program them was usually proprietary and generally expensive, and it was built for engineers, wasn't built for regular folks. But about 10 years ago, we got these boards that you see on the left here that we call Arduino. These were actually designed in an art school in Italy by professors who wanted to give their students the ability to work with electronics and putting simple electronics in their projects. And this takes that microcontroller chip, which you can kind of barely see there on the board, surrounded by a sea of blue, and puts it on a board that gives you easy access to a USB port, gives you easy ways to power that chip in your project, gives you these nice big holes that you can plug wires into and power your project. And These found an audience well beyond the artist community, and if you go and Google Arduino projects, you'll find projects for everything that you can imagine and quite a few things that you can't. And this really kind of blew up the amateur electronic design movement because it really just made it much easier to work with sophisticated electronics. Similarly, on the right, you see a board we call the Raspberry Pi. This is a single board Linux computer. It's an actual full computer on a board. You can plug that into a TV or a monitor and surf the web, write an email. And depending on which version of that you buy, they run from about $5 to $35. Similarly, with the Arduinos, there are now a dizzying number of those, but they run from about $10 and up. And so they are inexpensive enough that you can give them to young folks who don't have necessarily a traditional use for them, and let them just kind of hack with them and see what they can do and come up with. And it really allows for free-form experimentation with electronics. Means that you can do things that were hard to do just a few years ago. So digital fabrication tools are the second tool set that I'd like to talk about. And at this point, everybody has heard something about 3D printing. Maybe you've seen them in stores or elsewhere. A 3D printer, you can think of it just as a robot arm with a hot glue gun at the end that squirts out warmed plastic and moves that arm in a pattern to build layer by layer a shape that's an arbitrary shape that's defined in software. So you can build up quite complicated shapes. You can build shapes inside of shapes because you're building it up from the ground up. And you end up with the ability to relatively quickly produce an arbitrary plastic shape, which is a useful thing to be able to do. And the 3D printers are useful and cool tools. People are sort of waking up now to the fact that these are a little bit overhyped in that while that's a cool thing to be able to do, arbitrary shapes in plastic have their limitations. What the general public, I think, doesn't really know is that we have a number of other digital fabrication tools that are also coming to our desktops that enable us to get around some of those limitations. So CNC mills, similar to that, the 3D printer, you could think of it like a robot arm, but instead of a hot glue gun at the end, it's got a spinny cutting bit at the end. And so that enables your computer, you to computer control the cutting out of metals and plastics and woods and other materials, basically anything that's soft enough that you can cut it with a milling bit, with the particular milling bit that you have. And this is technology that's been around for decades, but just in the last 5 years, it's become radically easier and cheaper to bring to your desktop. To just use one more example, laser cutters. Again, you have our old friend, the robot arm, but this time with a big honking laser at the end instead of a hot glue gun or a spinning cutting bit. And so these enable you to cut wood, plastic, etch certain kinds of metals, and they're really fast, they're very precise, and they're quite easy to use. And those are also coming down in price. So with this kind of revolution in digital fabrication, you can put a pretty capable sort of desktop factory together for less than $10,000. And that's quite exciting and opens up a number of possibilities. So we can now, using these modular electronics, using these digital fabrication technologies, using some of the open source methods that were kind of carved out by the open source software movement, these tools allow us to kind of come together and as non-specialists, build sophisticated devices, build stuff that we can then replicate quite easily with a level of precision in a way that was difficult just a few years ago. And so if you think about this, if you don't need to be an engineer in order to make a device and in order to design a sophisticated device, if you don't need to make 50,000 of those, then that opens up a number of opportunities for applying technology to problems that don't really lend themselves to being solved by the traditional manufacturing method. So we can now apply hardware to problems that are don't necessarily require a 50,000 unit solution. But as cheap as these tools have become, most of us don't have the wherewithal to bring those into our houses. And so that's kind of where makerspaces come in. So makerspaces are places where people can come, get access to these kinds of tools, learn how to use them, but more importantly, to get access to a community of people around the tools so that you can trade information, trade ideas, and form collaborations around projects of mutual interest. So this photo here is of a tech shop. Tech shop is a chain of commercial makerspaces across the United States. They now have a scattering of locations overseas. And tech shop tends to be have large, elaborate facilities with basically every kind of tool you could think of. But that's not necessarily the only kind of makerspace you can have. You can have a much more modest space that can still provide that community element and provide people with access to tools. So this is a photo of the Cairo Hackerspace in Egypt. And these can really range from quite small and simple to quite large and elaborate and everything in between. The important part really is that community aspect. So I've seen spaces that have tremendous tools and really fantastic stuff to work with, but that aren't really being used by anybody. And I've seen spaces that don't really have much going for them in the way of hardware, but have a really great community, and there are a lot of great things coming out of. So this makerspace model, it's basically about giving you access to the tools, and generally what they'll do is they'll show you how not to hurt yourself using the tool, how not to hurt the tool, how to get some basic output out of that tool so that you can accomplish the goal that you have. But then really to let you run wild on that, on the theory that really sitting down at that is going to give you that hands-on experience, that free-form experience that's going to give you mastery. And the maker approach that is part of all of this really encourages that hands-on use, so that hands-on learning model. And when you have a hands-on learning model, you have to be comfortable with failure pretty quickly because you're going to make a lot of mistakes. And we really kind of embrace that as the shortest path to learning. So there's a makerspace gives you a free space, a safe space to fail, and in fact, encouragement and embracing that failure because that's how we really gain mastery. The maker culture is really kind of credentials agnostic. If you walk into one of these maker spaces and you're an electrical engineer, they're generally happy to see you, and there's probably a lot of people who have questions for you. If you don't know which end of a soldering iron to hold, they're happy to walk you through that. And there's an expectation that even as a novice, you'll be able to relatively quickly become a contributing member of that community. And there's a bias towards open source in these in the maker movement. It doesn't mean that nobody working in makerspaces is working on proprietary things, but generally the value is that we all move faster if we kind of move together and we share information and share techniques and share approaches. So we think that this has potentially a tremendous impact on developing countries in particular. We're seeing a lot of impact in the manufacturing sector here in the United States and also in the education sector. So this is very popular in primary and secondary education in the US and as well as post-secondary. But we're also seeing economic impacts here in the US. But for me, what's really exciting about this is that developing countries where that may not have had that industrial infrastructure to take advantage of those mass production advantages, where they may have more of these kinds of specialized problems that have not yet yielded themselves to technological solutions. This is particularly exciting. And it's going to be youth that are going to be at the forefront of that change, of that revolution. And because we have this kind of hands-on learning model, we have this open-ended freedom to fail space. It also lends itself to youth who maybe have not been well served by the traditional didactic education model. Because these spaces are community oriented, they do offer a social network that can be an alternative to some of the social networks that we would rather people not engage in. And it offers potentially short-term economic impact in that you can build things in a makerspace, and some of these spaces have woodworking or metalworking equipment that's kind of more traditional. And even here in the U.S., you'll see that people are using those to build things which they can immediately sell. And so as you're building up kind of these soft and hard skills in a makerspace, you can also be building things that have immediate revenue generation impact for you, as well as being able to test a market. So if you are building an item in the space, you haven't made that economic commitment to buying your own tools, you can see if you can really make sufficient income with those items to justify continuing to do that, potentially building up some capital there by which you can buy your own tools and scale up. So there's a lot here for youth, and that's pretty exciting. So I kind of rushed through that because I want to make sure that we give Eric sufficient time to talk. But if you have questions about any of that, please do go ahead and fill them in on the Q&A line.
Thanks, Rob. I appreciate it. It's a great overview. I've had the pleasure of visiting Rob in his lab. Some fascinating pieces going on there. It's an interesting place to visit in an otherwise file cabinet laden area. So I appreciate the overview and the great pictures. Block by block consulting. Just real quick, we're all about positive youth development. All of our strategies are rooted in positive youth development. And we come at the makerspace, youth makerspace movement as a process. It's really not an end goal, but an output of a community development process most times when we're involved. And it's all rooted in youth development. So I got a couple slides here. I want to just refresh us a little bit on positive youth development, the way that we think about it, because then you'll see this alignment come together with what we consider to be good makerspace environments. You'll see a lot of commonality. So youth development is the ongoing process with all young people are engaged, attempting to meet their basic and social needs to be safe, to feel cared for, be valued, useful, and spiritually grounded, and to build their skills and competencies to allow them to function and contribute in their daily lives. So you can already hear some of the same themes that Rob spoke about in terms of Makerspace. Again, good positive youth development. What are the key things that young people need? And here are a few: to learn and build skills, to test and explore ideas, to express themselves, to be creative, to experience a sense of group membership, to contribute and be of service to their community, and when appropriate, learn about working and be employed. Those are all the things that all young people want, regardless of where they live throughout the world. Again, we saw this definition earlier, but I wanted to, again, tie it all together around particularly this community of practice, around the working definition that we're using for meaningful youth engagement. And I won't read it all to you because it's long, but you'll see some key words in there. It's inclusive, mutually respectful partnership, ideas, strengthening skills again, again, contributing to their community, country, and globally. It also recognizes this power structure that young people are working side by side with adults in their communities and helping to find their own pathways. And again, just to remind us all, when we're talking about young people, we're talking about internationally 10 to 29 years old, regardless of socioeconomic or ethnic identity, sexual orientation, etc. So this is an all-inclusive component, and Makerspace is no different, in youth Makerspace in particular. So you heard Rob describe kind of Makerspace and what they traditionally have been, and they still continue to mostly take on this social club that are focused on fabricating and manufacturing. There's this idea of something productive and fascinating that's building some sort of skill set. Traditionally, they have taken on more of a STEM environment, robotics, 3D printing, all the things that Rob went through. But we're finding more and more that Makerspaces are taking on more of their own community identity. And that is beginning to include other things such as the arts. So it's coming from STEM to STEAM, where you're having a wider way in which people, young people and others in the community are coming together to play and explore. I thought it might be helpful to give you an example of what I mean by the process in a way in which Makerspace then has been related. So we've been working over the past several months with the community in Albion, Michigan. Now, Albion is self-described as a miniature Flint, Michigan. So I don't know if that helps you think about some of the economic conditions and the challenges that may exist for that community. One of the other things that's occurred over the past year in Albion is that all of the schools, the local schools, have closed for a variety of reasons. And now all the students, about 700 young people, or excuse me, a large number of young people that have now been moved to consolidated schools. That's not unheard of in lots of places in the United States. And as we know, working with young people, many of them travel great distances to go to school. One of the things that we know as youth development folks is that has a tendency then to break down the local connection to the community. And so what the young people in Albion, in partnership with Albion College, began to say, we don't want that fabric to be lost in our community. So let's continue to find a way to bring those young people, when they're not in school, back together in the community and stay connected to the rich heritage that we have here, in this case in Albion. And so they started as a process. Young people, students at the college and high school students began working together to identify what are the interest areas of younger elementary age young people. What are the things that they're interested in? How would they want to spend their time out of school? And so they went through our community youth mapping process to not only identify these opinions and aspirations, but they also use that same process in order to identify where maybe some physical spaces might be that young people can convene in a very safe, nurturing environment. Through that process, young people identified, through the Makerspace area, they identified things like robotics and 3D printing, but they also identified a connection to ceramic arts. Albion happens to have one of the largest kilns in the Midwest area, for example. And so young people wanted, and there's a rich history of arts in that community, and young people wanted to continue that tradition. And so arts became very much a focus interest area, as well as some of the more traditional ones Rob described. Then the next part of that process was identifying the right space. And so much like many places around the world, there was more and more vacant buildings becoming run down. And so young people identified in the old town Main Street some good, easy to access space that they wanted to create as their own youth space, a dedicated space for young people and the community collectively to come together and then work in a makerspace environment. So I wanted to share kind of that process in which some people get to what a good makerspace piece begins to look like. Again, from our perspective, a good makerspace is a dedicated youth space. So that doesn't mean it's a standalone facilities. Sometimes it's in a school library. Sometimes it's in a local NGO. Sometimes it's in a space that might become something else when it's not that time. But having a dedicated space allows for consistency. It allows having posted hours, allows for young people to have a reliability to know that they can come and be and explore the kinds of things that they're interested in. Youth-friendly space, again, we define that as barrier-free, caring adults, things of that sort that, again, make this an inviting space to allow young people to do what they want to do. There is a tendency for makerspaces as they mature to become potentially membership-oriented. Again, good positive youth development reminds us that young people want to be members. They want to belong consistently to a caring space and a caring environment in a collaborative way. Again, as makerspaces have matured, they continue to do this vetting system that allows young people to get trained and feel comfortable using tools that are there, so there's safety. But this also creates this built-in mentoring component from adults or peer-to-peer, depending on the expertise level. And so you begin to create, as Rob mentioned, this social networking that's so critical to young people's development and their esteem. And one of the things that we've continued to see is that good makerspaces continue to maybe create some sort of pathway toward achievement. One of the areas that we've been working in is around digital badging. It's not quite credentialing. Sometimes online there will be some digital badging, but some way to show achievement for young people and have continuous ways for them to step forward and continue to grow. So these are the key areas that we see that make up a youth makerspace. I'll give you another example about low cost and just the things you never expect. So in South Africa, we have a project we've been working on for years called Ragball. It's essentially young people building their own trash soccer balls. And they usually have newspaper or some sort of paper as the guts of these soccer balls. One of the things that through the makerspace evolution is that the young people began to identify how can we make these balls bounce a little bit more. And one of the things that these young people began to discover is that we have all of these unused condoms that have been available to us for a while. Let's maybe consider using what would that be like to create essentially a bladder inside, and then build the rag ball around that. And all of a sudden, they perfected it in a way that now these rag balls had this incredible bounce to them. So again, it's not necessarily the best way or the way that which we would have thought, but again, the ingenuity and the ability and the freedom to explore and have creative ideas resulted in maybe a better product. It's very interesting, kind of an example for us. And then lastly, on my last slide here, I wanted to just share a couple resources, links of places that you can go explore on your own. There are lots of them out there. The University of Michigan is, in my mind, an epicenter of youth makerspace movement. So they have lots of good places and resources online. The Maker Bridge one here is a community forum and an exchange of ideas of folks that are considering a youth makerspace or expanding theirs. So that's a good, rich place. There's a series of books and places specifically with strategies on elementary and middle school here in the United States, but primary education. And then I mentioned the badging, Taking IT Global, which is a significant partner of ours. They do a lot and have written a lot about digital badging and what that looks like and how you could set up that kind of pathway. So I just wanted to amplify a little bit of what Rob said and give you some concrete examples of how good positive youth development can become meaningful youth engagement strategies that allow Makerspace as a way to allow young people to be creative and explore.
So thank you, Rob and Eric, for that great introduction to the Maker movement and why it's so important to use it as a tool for working with youth. For me, the main takeaways for the webinar align well with Hart's ladder of youth participation, as you can see on the PowerPoint. So by design, the Maker movement engages youth beyond the beneficiary role as informed and assigned participants because the Makerspace empowers young people as equal stakeholders. They can convene peer-to-peer learning with youth as leaders, teachers, and trainers in actual Makerspaces. And Makerspaces offer youth decision-making power alongside their adult peers. So to me, Makerspaces seem to be a natural fit for a youth-friendly location to meet youth where they are, both physically and mentally. And like Eric said, through the right processes, we can change the power structure of places such as Makerspaces so that youth are valued as experts in an intentional and mutually respectful partnership. And what's most important, I think, to point out here is that youth engagement doesn't just mean working with youth, but also working with their communities, families, and mentors in a collaborative way. And I think maker spaces allow for that kind of community and whole of family approach. So now I'm happy to take questions from the Q&A box. So please send them to us, and we'll go ahead and read them out. So we have our first question here. Who are the potential sources of funding that we can mobilize to set up a community makerspace? Eric or Rob?
Well, I meant to mention, and I'm sure Rob has others as well, but, and there are lots, but we have been working with Intel, and they've invested quite a bit in makerspaces, not only here in the States, but around the world. So Intel's we found to be a real committed partner to this space. So that's one private corporation that I think should, and again, check out their material online. They've got a lot of good videos, etc.
Yeah, and that's a great suggestion. There are a number of private sector companies that have resources for folks who are starting makerspaces, whether that's in the form of funding or in-kind items. And so Autodesk, which is a producer of a lot of the 3D design software, 2D and 3D design software, that can be quite expensive if you were to purchase it at list price. They're very good about offering free memberships, free licenses for makerspaces. You'll find that there are companies like National Instruments are sometimes willing to donate equipment or give equipment at a substantial discount to makerspaces because they recognize this as an emerging market for their kinds of tools. But I would say also that, you know, in terms of starting spaces in a developing country, all of the kind of traditional donors that you would look at for community spaces, so both the, you know, your international donors, but also the organizations that are active in the community, municipalities and you know, civil society organizations that may have space available that you could use, and you know, you can bring tools into that space. Some, you know, we have spaces here in the U.S. Particularly aimed at, you know, kind of school-age kids that you know, are centered around things like tearing apart old electronics, you know, just tearing apart old machines so you can see how they work. And that's, you know, always pretty easy to get. So if you have a space and you have, you know, some screwdrivers and some other tools to tear stuff apart, that can be really interesting. And then you can, you know, that's sort of the first step toward building stuff back up again. So that can be done quite cheaply.
I would also just recommend, as all of us are continue to work on proposals and technical approaches, this is an excellent strategy for youth entrepreneurship, for there's STEM related, other learning and education proposals. There's lots of opportunities to take an approach like this and make it part of an overall strategy. So I think this applies a lot to a lot of potential technical approaches in our proposals.
And Rob and Eric, I know we have another question here about who are some of the funders internationally. I know we have participants online from Zimbabwe, from Puerto Rico, Kenya, and Cambodia. Do you have any examples of international funders?
Yes, so actually all those funders I named do work internationally. So, and Eric mentioned Intel, they're doing a lot of stuff really all around the world, and they're extremely active, especially in Africa. Autodesk, I have those kinds of partnerships all over the world. Um, National Instruments also. I'm thinking very much from an international perspective, and so all of those things that I mentioned are applicable.
Yeah, in the energy industry, again in Africa in particular, as well as the big, larger engineering firms that are building brick and mortar. All of these folks are investing in Makerspace as they want to continue to build their local skill set of young people and have them have the opportunity to not only contribute to the community, but participate in the innovation.
Thank you, Eric and Rob. I think we have another question here from Lauren in South Africa. And Lauren, thank you for your question, because if you didn't ask it, I was going to. Lauren's interested in the number of adolescent girls and young women that participate in the Makerspaces. She noticed that many of the participants in the photos were male. Rob and Eric, are there any recruiting or targeting that are specific to encourage female participation?
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah, go ahead,
I
Rob.
didn't mean to step on you there. There's a lot of stuff that you can do, and there you see a number of spaces that do a good job of this. You do often see, and certainly here in the U.S. Actually, I find more in the U.S. than in a lot of other places. You do see that these tend to be male-dominated spaces.
I would agree.
And I actually think some of the spaces I've been to, perhaps surprisingly in the Middle East, do a better job of this than we do here. But when you want to kind of tilt that table in that direction, there are a lot of things you can do either with the design of your space and the inclusions of the kinds of things in there, or in the design of your programming and hours. So if you're concerned that having that the kind of natural balance of that space, that the crowd that's going to be most attracted to that space is going to be male, and that's going to make some women uncomfortable to come into the space, you can have either female only hours, or you can have programming that's specifically aimed to bring women into the space. You can have things where you may have some cultural barriers, and again, we very much have these in the United States also. You might have some cultural ideas that certain activities are kind of more male and others are more female, and you can use that to attract girls into the space with something that's sort of going to be traditionally attractive to them, and make sure that what you have right next to that is an area that has some of these attractive activities that they might not feel like are for them, but which you can then take advantage of to really show them that that's interesting and completely accessible to them also. So there's a lot that you can do in terms of programming, in terms of what you decide to offer in the space, and like any other community space, in just creating a friendly, welcoming space for everybody that's going to be inclusive, and where everybody can feel like they can have a good and useful time in there.
And for us, that's exactly why I started our part of this webinar with the process. You have to engage both boys and girls together collectively to be able to even define that space that Rob just described. And so when you're getting contribution and you're having ownership available to all, then you have an opportunity to make sure that you're hitting the right areas of interest.
Thank you. Eric, we have a question specifically for you. So in the South Africa example with the soccer balls, was it also used to discuss how to use condoms for prevention of pregnancy and STIs?
Yeah, actually, that that was the first part. The young people have been through. It was an HIV, STI overall approach, and using sports for life, if you will, as a way in which to engage young people. And then it evolved into an entrepreneurship kind of piece, and then it continued to evolve again into Makerspace and this ingenuity. So yes, the condoms definitely have, and the messaging's always been around the primary piece and the education that it's for. So it just became this, I don't know, creative way to use a resource available to them.
Okay, great. Do we have any last questions that you want to send to the Q&A box to any participants? Okay, one last question here. So Eliza is interested in the finances behind how to run a makerspace in a developing country. She's less concerned about the initial investment, but more how to keep things running as you can go through materials pretty quickly in a maker setting. Are there any examples of using found materials such as bottles or metals in the community and turning it into materials or different kinds of equipment that are able to melt down materials, etc.? Rob or Eric, I don't know if one of you wants to start.
Yeah, no, actually, that's you see that a lot using using found and spare materials. So the example that I would point to, there's a space in Togo called Woe Labs, and Woe Labs is what they're kind of most famous for is e-waste 3D printers. So they have a lot of these kind of e-waste dumps scattered around the country, and they kind of go into these and pull out, generally from kind of discarded laser printers, some of the parts that you need in order to build a 3D printer, so the smooth rods, some of the stepper motors and things like this, and they will create 3D printers from those. In terms of melting materials down, there's a project in Mexico that is aimed at building, designing and building machines that will enable people to pull certain kinds of plastics out of the trash and kind of wash those out and melt them down for filament for, again, 3D printers. And then you get kind of the more traditional, let's see what we have at hand, and because we have the tools in order to build those things into other stuff, let's see how we can use that to build something interesting.
Okay, great. We have another question from Lauren in South Africa. She said some of the examples are really cool and interesting, but may not be relevant for her target population in South Africa. So Eric, a question for you. In terms of process, how do you go about brainstorming what is relevant for a community, especially in such a diverse community that a makerspace brings in?
Yeah, so I mean, it's very similar to any other youth engagement strategy. So again, we have some specific processes we go through. For example, one is youth space, that the young people, as it might sound, come together collectively and help define what a good productive, youth-friendly space is, and then they participate in that design. And sometimes that takes on a physical structure, sometimes it just takes on a programmatic structure. It varies. And so getting young people together and coalesced around something that contributes back to their community, and they have an opportunity to participate. And those are the fundamental things that we talked about in the beginning from a meaningful youth engagement. And so from there, it can blossom. So while I know Makerspace traditionally looks like a lot of electronics and pieces, and in a lot of places it looks like that, there are more and more places that it doesn't look like that. It's culinary, it's music, it's arts. It takes on a whole different piece. And the idea is that we still have the freedom to explore. We still have the freedom to collaborate. We still have the freedom to have meaningful relationships with the adults that are coming together around and making improvements in a community. And so Makerspace, in my mind, in a more general way, is really this creative space. So sometimes it has a very technical piece to it and technology bent to it, but it doesn't have to always.
And Eric, just to follow up on that, so in terms of creative spaces, how do you ensure that you allow for youth who might not know exactly what they want in the beginning to really delve into that creativity? And are there mechanisms such as brainstorming sessions, or how are youth engaged kind of initially?
Yeah, so with, again, a key in our opinion is really the adults that are going to be working with young people, and how prepared are they to truly work with young people in this way. And there are a fair number of adults working with young people that may not fully take on the positive youth development approach to working with young people. And one of the things that we think is very important is setting the stage with the adults that are going to be a part of working with young people, so that they're adequately prepared and creating that nurturing environment from the beginning. Young people will make their contribution. We never have any question or concern about young people being able to do that, as long as they're invited and they have that safe space to do so. And so for us, a lot of times that starts with the community stakeholders and the adults that are going to be primarily working with those young people.
Yeah, and I would also say that it always helps to have some examples of stuff that's been done with some of these tools to kind of to show to people, because the stuff can be very very motivating and inspiring. I mean, and actually, I would kind of defy you to walk into a good makerspace and not kind of get excited about what's there and what people can do and what they're doing. The other thing I would say is that, so I'm seeing some questions here from South Africa and from Uganda asking for, kind of how would you get started? And these are not places where you have to start from zero. So there's actually a fair amount that's been done in South Africa. There are.
That's right.
Africa. Uganda has a couple of groups that are working. I know that Fundibots in Kampala does a lot of work with kids, and they're very much STEM oriented. But I would echo what Eric is saying, is that even though my focus has been on electronics, and my rationale for that is largely because that's the piece that has been hard for developing countries to work in. Then you definitely see a whole range of these things. But Fundibots works primarily in STEM and robotics. They're working in Kampala. They seem to have a pretty impressive program. There's a space called McBots. That's not in Kampala. It's somewhere else in Uganda. I can't remember exactly where that is. But if you look around, you might be surprised at where people are already working on these things, and where you already have communities of people that you can tap for expertise and for partnerships.
Great. We have another question here from Eliza. Rob and Eric, I know, can you give any examples of long-term success stories that youth have really found solutions to community challenges that have led to either employment or creation of a small business, but where makerspaces have really had tangible resulted or been correlated to having tangible opportunities for youth?
So what I would say, this is Rob, this is still kind of a new territory, particularly in developing countries. There are lots of examples like that in developed countries. So if you go on Kickstarter and you look at the hardware that's offered on Kickstarter, chances are pretty good that most of that was prototypes in Makerspaces, and that's going to be predominantly, obviously the older end of the age range that we're talking to about youth, but it is going to be a lot of youth doing that. And so you have a lot of people who are starting businesses, large or small, based on that. In developed countries, we're still kind of dipping the toe in terms of developing countries, but there's no question in my mind that we'll get there pretty soon, where we'll have some good examples to show. And there may be good examples that I just don't know.
Well, Rob, and again, maybe this isn't relevant, but it stood out to me when I visited you, the one that you were showing us the device that was helping folks predict floods and water levels. That seemed like a fascinating kind of manifestation of some simple electronics that was there being able to serve the community in a very important way.
That's absolutely true. I understood the question to be aimed at where are solutions coming kind of from the ground up from youth who are building small businesses or building. And I would actually, part of what's interesting to me about this is, we're used to, and again, my focus is technology, but we're used to technology being applied to problems coming out of the private sector, coming out of a business that produces the thing. Because we have these tools and approaches, we don't necessarily have to rely on business to solve those problems for us. So, I've worked with civil society organizations and others on building hardware that can be meaningful to a community that doesn't necessarily have anything to do with the private sector. But that's how I understood the question. Certainly, there are devices that we're applying in the context of projects that I believe make an impact in communities. So, I mean, I don't think there's any question that can be done. I'm not aware of. Well, let me take that back. Okay, so I know that there's the MIT D Lab works with a number of facilities around the world where they have spaces that are teaching folks to build things like bicycle-powered machinery and things like that. And I know that there are a number of entrepreneurs working out of those spaces who have done things like built corn threshers that are bicycle-powered that enable them to get the. I'm sure I'm using the wrong term. I'm not a corn guy, but getting the kernels off of a cob of corn, and that they're really able to enhance existing small businesses with that kind of stuff. So there are those examples, but I'm sure we're going to see a much wider range of examples within the next couple.
And we have one more question, and if anyone has any last-minute questions, we're just about to wrap up here. But Rob and Eric, do you have any? Are there any evaluations of Makerspaces that could be shared?
I'm only familiar with the comprehensive evaluations in the United States. As Rob mentioned, Makerspaces of movement in developing countries is fairly new. So there are those. In fact, I'm pretty sure the University of Michigan, if again, those links I shared earlier, you will be able to get into a couple there, but they're out there for sure. We can certainly.
Yeah, I'm not aware of any for developing country makers.
Okay, and one follow-up question, going back to taking the skills forward and connecting Makerspaces to tangible opportunities. Rob and Eric, if you could dream up anything, what would you do to make sure that we're supporting young people and taking these skills forward and helping connect them to sustainable livelihood opportunities? Yeah, what would you recommend, what do you think are some of the what have you learned, and what would you apply to help makerspaces be more connected to actual livelihood opportunities?
So, I mean, I think it's, as we talk about that direct connection to livelihoods, which again, really depends on what you're looking for. That's not necessarily what every space needs to do. But as we're looking at direct connections toward livelihoods, you really need to take a look at what are the needs in that community, what are the opportunities, and what are the resources that you have at hand. So as you kind of plan out the tool sets that you're going to deploy in that space, and trying to kind of look at what are the unmet needs, what are some of the things that you can do there in connecting that. I'm excited about, here in the US, we have lots of people who are building a prototype of a product in a makerspace, and then we now have kind of a non-traditional path for people to get funding to mass manufacture that and bring that to market. And as I said before, mass manufacture is now not the only way that we have to apply these things, and I think that's really important. However, mass manufacturing is also not obsolete, and we have to recognize that more kind of traditional path for hardware is still important. And so you have these crowdfunding platforms like Kickstarter that are enabling people to do kind of mass manufacturing, sort of small run mass manufacturing. You have the infrastructure largely in South China that enables you to do that. And manufacturing hardware remains hard, but this kind of on-ramp has become easier. And so I'm excited to see what some of these what projects are going to come out of some of these developing country maker spaces that might be able to bridge that gap using crowdfunding platforms and moving to mass manufacture, perhaps to meet global markets or perhaps to meet specific regional markets that are being underserved by the design and manufacturing houses in the West. So I think there's a lot of untapped potential there, and again, I'm sure we're going to see some of that in the next 5 to 10 years.
Just quickly, the piece I'm most excited about is not surprisingly going to be a little bit more general in terms of the things that we know are working and why makerspaces are continuing to thrive and will continue to thrive has to do with the environment that is nurtured there. And if we can continue to learn from what they're producing and apply that to other traditional education and other traditional programming and opportunities that young people have, then we will see a tremendous amount of growth. So for me, that's what I'm most excited about. Is this is such a strong example of youth development, positive youth development, the things that work well through meaningful youth engagement. If we can continue to see those things applied in other traditional areas, would
Great. Well, thank you everybody for your participation in our first webinar. Please continue the conversation through our community of practice, through Twitter, and through our youthpower.org resource center. The last slide includes a link to our youthpower.org site and the Youth Engagement Community of Practice website with all of our work to date. So we will post a recording of the webinar and the slides and any follow-up tools there for your reference. Thank you all, and I look forward to continuing the conversation offline.
Thanks.